When a seller accepts an offer, it's a big moment. It often feels like the hard part is over. You've listed the home, you've had showings, and now you've accepted an offer. But in reality, accepting an offer is not the end of the process. It's the beginning of a new phase. And understanding what happens next is important because this is where many of the details of the transaction are worked out. The first step after an offer is accepted is opening escrow. This is when the transaction officially begins moving forward. A neutral third party, typically an escrow company, is brought in to handle the process. They hold the funds, coordinate documents, and help ensure that everything is completed according to the terms of the agreement. Once escrow is opened, the buyer will typically deposit their initial funds, often referred to as the earnest money deposit or the good faith deposit. This shows that the buyer is serious about moving forward with the purchase. After that, the transaction enters what is often called the contingency period. This is a very important phase. During this time, the buyer has the opportunity to investigate the property and confirm that they want to move forward. One of the first things that happens during this period, is the inspection process. The buyer may hire a home inspector to evaluate the condition of the property. They might also bring in specialists depending on the home. The purpose of the inspection is to identify any issues or concerns with the property. And once that information is gathered, the buyer has options. They can move forward as is, they can request repairs, or they can request, or they can request a credit. This is where negotiation can happen again. Even though you've already agreed on a price, the terms can still be adjusted based on what comes up during inspections. As a seller, this is a point where you may need to make decisions. Do you agree to the repairs? Do you offer a credit? Or do you decline the request? Another key part of the process is the appraisal. If the buyer is using financing, their lender will require an appraisal. This is an independent evaluation of the property's value based on comparable sales. If the appraisal comes in at the agreed upon price, then the process continues smoothly. But if it comes in lower, that can create another point of negotiation. At that point, the buyer and seller may need to work together to find a solution. That could involve adjusting the price, renegotiating terms, or in some cases, the buyer bringing in additional funds. While all of this is happening, the buyer is also working on their loan. This includes underwriting, document review, and final approval from the lender. This is another critical phase because the transaction depends on the buyer being able to secure financing. As the process continues, contingencies are eventually removed. This is when the buyer formally commits to moving forward with the purchase. Once contingencies are removed, the transaction becomes much more secure. At that point, the focus shifts towards closing. This includes finalizing documents, coordinating timelines, and preparing for the transfer of ownership. Before closing, there is typically a final walkthrough. This is when the buyer visits the property one last time to confirm that everything is in the expected condition, same as it was when they originally viewed the home. If everything's in order, the transaction moves to closing. This is when documents are signed, funds are transferred, and ownership officially changes hands. One thing I always tell sellers is that even after accepting an offer, staying engaged in the process is important because this phase involves multiple steps, timelines, and moving parts. There may be moments where decisions need to be made quickly. There may be negotiations that come up unexpectedly, and there may be adjustments that need to happen along the way. Understanding the process ahead of time helps reduce stress because instead of reacting to each step, you know what to expect. Another important point is communication. Staying in close communication with your agent and the parties involved helps keep everything on track. When everyone is aligned and responsive, the process tends to move more smoothly. Accepting an offer is a major milestone, but it's just one step in the overall process. Understanding what happens next allows you to move forward with confidence and avoid surprises along the way. because a smooth closing is not just about the offer. It's about how the transaction is managed from that point forward. I post new real estate insights every Wednesday. See you next week. Thanks for watching. Take care.